So let's get started. I'm really happy and glad to be here today to talk to you about state management in Angular and what it is all about. But before we actually jump into the topic, I want to tell you something about myself and why I'm here today. My name is Cornelia Rauch. I am from Austria, and I'm really glad and happy to be here in a city where also Germans understand me when I speak German. So that's good. I work for a company that's called SOFTWAREarchitekt.at. We do Angular consultants and trainings. And I also like to organize some community events to give something back. We organize meetups, and I also do code dojos for kids. And sometimes I also volunteer as a mentor for NgGirls. If you don't know NgGirls, look it up. It's an awesome cause. And we work in Austria, Germany, and all around Europe sometimes. And this is our newest product. If you like to, go to the website and check it out. So who of you in this room has WhatsApp? A lot of people. So I recently had the pleasure of organizing an event, and I had like this WhatsApp group. And it was crazy. I tried to, get some information out of people, and some people answered 3 questions after the original question, and some people didn't answer at all, and others were just posting cat pics in the group. So it was a crazy thing, it was hard, and I still wanted to end up with something that's like well organized and a nice event. So naturally, all the crazy things that were happening reminded me of state management. And this is the topic we are going to talk about today. We generally talk about state. What is state in a web application? How can you categorize state? What do you actually need to manage in your web application? And what are ways to manage? We're going to look at 2 libraries specifically, because I don't have time to do more libraries, and I also going to be some live coding. So I'm going to be brave and hopefully get through the live coding safe. So first, let's look at state and what is state in a web application. So here I have a few things that are all can be part of a web application. For example, making a REST call to a backend and receiving some data back, or what is written in the URL. So the question is everything actually necessarily state on this slide? Has anybody idea? Just take a second, take a look at it. Short answer is yes. Everything that you can see on this slide here can be considered somehow state in a web application, and you might take care of this state. So how do I make sense of all of this mess? I mean, it's a lot. You can categorize this state in web application. So most of the web application nowadays has a backend somewhere with a database. And everything that's stored on this database also kind of belongs to the web application. So this is considered server state. If you make a call to the backend and receive some state back and get it on your client, this is called persistent state. Then we have state that is not stored on the server, it's just in the URL. So everything that's written in your URL can also be considered state, and you should take care of it. Then we have things that are not on the server and just live on the client and can also be represented in the URL. For example, a filter you're applying to your web application, and when you refresh it, you want this filter to be still active on your web application. This is called client state. Very similar to that, we also have transient client state, which is the same, but it's not represented in the URL. And then last but not least, we have local UI state. So that's a lot of categories you can take care of and how you consider your state. But let's look at an example. You should consider if you need to share the state across somewhere and how long-lived the state is. So in this example, we look at how we can manage those kinds of states. I have a book application where I also show you some examples of it. And this book application is a bookshop, and you can shop for books in it. And those are things that are in the book application. So I have books I have to take care of. They're stored on the server, and there are also some part of the books are on my client because I call for them. Then I have a way of filtering my books, and this filtering of books is represented in the URL as well as data that is living on the client. I have a shopping basket where I can shop for books and look like what books are already in my shopping basket, and those are not represented in the URL. So we have here transient client state, and then some really component-specific state, which can be like a color of a button that I have to take care of, or CIPI that might be open or closed at a certain state in my application. So those two states I really have to take care of, because they are between two different domains. I have to synchronize the state. The other ones are also important, but I don't have to be so. I don't have to care so much about those because they're easier to manage. So how do we actually manage state in our application? There are certain ways that were done in the past. For example, you can just save everything in the URL, right? That's a good idea. Or you can save everything in cookies. That has been done in the past. Furthermore, session and local stories, or maybe you should consider hidden fields, or just don't care about state at all. Maybe not the best ideas. All of those ideas are valid, you can do it, but most of them are in plain text, limited in size, and other things where you should not consider those for managing state. So here are some better suggestions what you can use to manage state in your Angular application. You should consider the concept of smart and dumb components to think of where your state should live and where you should manage your state. Then you should also think about using services for managing state, like observable data service. Here in Angular, we have the library RxJS, and we can use it to store our data with certain subjects. And then we can use some third-party libraries to manage state. I'm going to talk about one third-party library we can use to manage state, which is going to be NgRx, but there are also many others out there. I've chosen RxJS and NgRx to talk about because RxJS is like the minimum you can do, and NgRx is like the biggest state management library that is out there in the moment and needs a lot of knowledge and to get into this library. So you kind of have a comparison of like the smallest thing, like the biggest thing that's out there, and everything else it's like kind of in between. And you should manage your state because you give your users a better user experience by managing your state, and you can take a better overview over your application, and you should do it. So first look at the first concept that's always important and you should always take in mind when managing state in your application, which are smart and dumb components. Smart and dumb components is a concept that is like really in Angular, and you should always think about it when you're designing your application. So smart components are components that know about business logic, they know about your state, they know about how to manage your state. And dumb components do not care about your state. They should be just there and be pretty and don't know about any business logic. In Angular, you do this with input and output and property bindings and event bindings. So this is the application I was talking about where you can buy some books. So you basically just have a list of books and you have to take care of this list of books. And here is how the structure in my web application looks like. So I have a list of books, and this list of book component has book items, and those book items have a like button and a shopping cart button. So like button and shopping cart button are obviously just dumb component. They don't really do anything. They're just displaying the button and they're there to be pretty. And also the book item doesn't need to have so much logic. They're just displaying the book as an item. So all the logic in this component tree structure should be in the book item, which looks like this. And those are just like 3 components. And you can already see if you have this input-output structure, you're going to have some problems. Because those are just 3 components, and if you have more, it gets really unreadable and gets really messy. And you also might have stuff that you're just passing through other components down to one component, and it's really hard to follow at the time. So this approach has its limitations. What are the limitations? First of all, you just can use it for parent-child communication. So if you have like a sibling component you want to give states to, you can't use this one. Furthermore, it's not really good for complex applications. So if you have like really something that has more than 3 components, basically, you should still use smart and dumb components, but not for managing all of your state. And it also gets really unreadable if you just use smart and dumb components to pass state somewhere. So let's look at the second example where we need to share state across the application. This is our shopping basket. So the shopping basket state is represented at three different parts of this application. First of all, here next to my book item, we have represented how many books of one book I bought. Then we can also open our shopping cart and look at details of the shopping cart and delete something of the shopping cart. And then it's also represented here on the right left corner of the application. It's the sum of books that I've bought. So we have 3 places in our application we have to manage the state and synchronize the state between and share the state. And this cannot be done anymore with just smart and dumb component and passing the state down the tree. So we have here one sibling component, which is the shopping cart. And to manage the state in this case, we can use something like a service in Angular. And then synchronize the state with the service. One way to do that, as I told before, is with the RxJS library. So we're going to take a look at what the RxJS library can do with us considering state. In the core of the RxJS library, there is a subject. And a special kind of subject is the behavior subject. The subject is something you can multicast values to more than just one position. And so this is perfect for managing our state because we want to multicast our state to more than one component. And furthermore, the behavior subject is a special kind of observable which stores the latest value that is emitted to it. So if you subscribe, if another part of the application subscribes to it, it gets the last thing that was emitted to it. So for managing our state, the behavior subject is perfect. Furthermore, we always have to initialize our behavior subject with some initial value, so the state is never undefined. So here I just initialize this behavior subject of books with an empty array. And in order to share it with other components, I can make an observable out of my subject and just use this observable then in the other components. Here I have an example for adding books to this observable, so kind of managing my state. And in order to do that, the behavior subject also has like a really neat functionality because with .value to the behavior subject, I can get the last value of the behavior subject and just add in this way with the spread syntax the book to my new list. And then I can just emit the new list with the added book to my behavior subject and inform everybody who is subscribed to it that we have a new list of books. In order to subscribe to behavior subject, there are 2 ways. You can explicitly subscribe to it with taking the observable of your service and call subscribe onto it. And then you get always the latest value of books and maybe just save it in your component and then use it to display your book. The second way is you can do it in the HTML with the Async Pipe that is provided by Angular itself, and it will resolve your observable and give you back a list of books. We can see this later in the example. And the good way of this approach is that it implicitly unsubscribes from your observable, so you don't have to manage your unsubscriptions. If you do .subscribe, you have to unsubscribe at some point. So maybe in NgOnDestroy, you would have to unsubscribe, otherwise you would have get performance issues, for example. So let's look at demo. Let's look at the demo. So here I have my super cool book applications, And I have here my list of books already, and I want to filter those books. But the filtering functionality is not implemented yet, so it does not work. It basically does nothing. It just changes the filter in the router up here, but the filtering functionality is not implemented yet. So let's take a look at our application. So here I already created a book service, and the book service is already providing me with a list of all books here. And this observable is used in my book list component. And I load all book, and I display all books. And here I also get from the active route, I get the current filter. And what I want to implement now, I want to use this filter that I'm getting from my router and filter my books accordingly. So let's jump into the book service and implement this functionality. So what am I going to need? I'm going to need a new behavior subject which is representing my current filter. So I'm making this private, because you should never share your subject, because if you're exposing your subject, everybody can just change it. And you should wrap these functionalities for filters. So here I'm making a new current filter, and this is going to be a behavior subject, as I said before, and it's holding me a number. So I can also say like which kind of behavior subject this is. And I'm going to initialize this with new behavior subject, which is also going to be a number. And I'm just going to say -1 if there's no filter given. Okay, cool. And here I have already a function that I'm calling from my book list component, which is updating my filter ID. So I'm getting the filter ID, and I use my subject that I created and emit the next genre ID to it. So I'm filtering for genres. And now it should be updated, and now I want to have a list of filtered books back, right? So I create an observable which is called filtered books. And I use the dollar syntax because it tells me that's an observable. If you read it, it's kind of a convention. You don't have to do it, but it's nice if you're reading the code. So this is going to be observable, and now this is going to be a list of books. And this list of books will take the current filter. And now I'm not calling as observable to just make an observable out of the filter, because then it's going to be a number. So I want to do something else with it. And so I also can implicitly pipe and use here the map operator and call here in this map operator a function that will give me back a list, make out of the IDs a list of books. So it transfers the ID to a book, so it's searching in the value that I'm holding in the all books observable at the moment, and it gives me back the book I'm searching for. So here I have a little helper function to be a little bit faster, because you have a lot to cover, and this is going to filter my books. And this is taking the genre ID, and it's going to give me back a book array. And when we look at pipe, what it does, it gives me back an observable, so I don't have to call as observable on it anymore. So now I'm done in my service. The only thing it's left to do, I have to go back to my book list components where I'm managing my state, and instead of here giving back all books, I want to just show the filtered books that I exposed. And I also have here, when I'm updating my book list from the router, I have to give it the genre ID. So I take my book service and call the function filter by genres, and I give it the current genre ID that I'm getting from the router. So, and if this works well, I should now be able to filter my books. So I have one book which is romance, and here I don't have any suspense books, but I have some action and adventure books. So I now have like filtering implemented. So let's jump back to the presentation. So cool. It seems like RxJS is providing me with all the functionality I need to manage state in my application, right? We're done. You can go home now. However, consider the following construct. So you have a component tree, and you have one service, and the service is communicating and managing state of many components, which is fine, looks okay. So then you have another service, which is doing something else, and it's communicating to this service and also do some other component. And then you have another service, which is also doing stuff and managing state, and another service, and another service, and another service, and it's going to get complicated. It's hard to go to see what's happening here, and it's going to be hard to debug your application and still know where state is managed and what's going on. So if you have a construct like this in your application and you're currently managing your state with RxJS, you should maybe consider an alternative. Because the nice catch will then not feel like a nice catch anymore. You're going to feel like this cat. And if you feel like that and you feel like you're struggling with your application setup, you should maybe use a library. One of the state management libraries that is out there is NgRx. And of course, saying if you have multiple services that communicate with each other and so on, you should use NgRx for that is like an oversimplification. So NgRx itself came up with a few things you should consider to use NgRx. So first of all, we have shared. If your state is shared over multiple services and multiple components, you should consider NgRx. Furthermore, if your state can be hydrated, for example, from a local storage, if you reload the application, you should consider NgRx. Furthermore, if you're re-entering a route and your state should be still available, like with our filter function, you should consider NgRx. Also, if your state is retrieved with a side effect, and side effect means something that is coming out from outside that you don't have influence on it. For example, calling something with the HTTP client, so from a REST backend. And also, if your state has impact from another state, you should consider NgRx. So if all these things are true for your web application, you should take a look into your library. But generally, it's for like really big application, you're having a hard time managing your state. Now, NgRx is based on the 3 principles of Redux. And we know Redux we know Redux, but I'm going to explain it here as well. So in Redux, you have these 3 principles, and the first principle is you have a single source of truth. So you have one object tree that's going to be serializable, and it can also be hydrated. Another thing about Redux, your state is going to be read-only, which means it can be only manipulated with actions you emit to your state via reducers. And those reducers who can change your state are just going to be pure functions. What are pure functions? 2 examples. A pure function is something that has like always the same, for the same input, the same outcome. So if you have a function that is adding 2 numbers and you pass in 1 and 1, the outcome will be always 2, no matter how often you put this number into. And it also, pure function is something that doesn't have a side effect. So something that has an HTTP call within it can never be a pure function. So let's look at this in color. So we have our state, which is a normal object tree, and then we can select some slice of state if we want to know about it in our component. So we can use selectors to get state from our object tree and show it in our components, for example, a list of books. And if we want to change or add something to the list of books, we can dispatch an action. And this action will be received by reducers, and we know reducers are just pure function, and the user is going to use its pure function to produce a new state and send it back to the state. So we have a nice circle here, and that's what we're going to talk about. This is considered the store in NgRx. So there's a lot going on there. And because there's a lot going on there, you can imagine that we need a lot of things we have to manage in NgRx. And so what's often mentioned with NgRx that you need like a lot of boilerplate code to get started with NgRx. And this boilerplate code is by design. It's for all this reason that we mentioned before. You have to manage your state, and you want to still be aware where state is changed, and you want to reproduce your state. You need this kind of structure, and you need this kind of boilerplate to stay on top of things. So what is boilerplate? Here we have, for example, 3 files that you need for managing NgRx. So we have the actions. We know what actions are. We read with action, we can manipulate our state. We have selectors that we can select slices of our state. And then we have the reducer's new state. And then we have effects, and we're going to talk later about effects. There are for managing side effects in the NgRx store, and I didn't have it yet in my diagram. So to help us out with all this boilerplate, there is a library from Navel, which is really neat, which I'm going to use in my example, that is going to help us produce some boilerplate code and has some neat schematic function for the Angular CLI to help us out with everything. So how do you add NgRx with the Navel extension NX to your application? You can do that simply with the Angular CLI, and you just say ng add the Navel extension from Angular, and then you can do something like add a feature state. So you use NgGenerate add Navel Angular NgRx, then it's your name of your feature state, which is going to be in my case book or books. I wrote books here, and then you tell it in which model this feature state will create it. In this case, it's just your root state and not really a feature state. So you have one root state, and you can have multiple feature states after this. So how does your book state look like? As I told you before, it's basically just an object tree, and this is a feature. So you have a structure of objects in objects, and here we have a partial state, which is the book state, which is going to manage our list of books, if the books are loaded, if there are errors, or if we have a book selected currently, for example. So this is a really small slice of state, and we can manage this and manipulate this state with these actions. So here I have just 2 actions I put out, and with create actions and some string, you can create a new action that you can send down. And you say, these are just strings, it's easy to reproduce, and you can just send it then to your reducer, and your reducer will then get these actions. So you can create a reducer with initial state that you set up, like we had in the behavior subject. We had an empty array, so it's going to be an empty array, empty list of books. And you can also listen to action, like if the books are loaded, please create me a new state. And this state going to consist of the new list of books, and tell me also if the books are loaded. And in this case, it's true. And in order to select books from a state, we can also create selectors. And in this case, I created a selector which is getting me books from my total book state. So I can just cut out a slice of my state and listen to that in my component. What I left out before are the effects for managing side effects. And you can rewrite some functions to not have side effects at all, but some functions have side effect by default, so you cannot avoid it. For example, an HTTP call will always have a side effect because you can't influence what's coming back from you. So if you're hearing side effects, it seems like it's something that's unexpected and you don't know what's happening, but basically a side effect is just something that's coming from another source you can't really influence, but it's not really something unexpected. So in here, the effects class helps us out. It helps us for listening, it sits between the action and the reducer basically, and it helps us to do something before something comes to the reducer, and lets the reducer stay pure, because it's just using pure functions, and functions that have side effects are not pure. So it helps us out managing side effects. For example, we can listen here to load books, and because we want to get our books from the backend, for example, we have to make an HTTP call, and we can do that within here. So we have here our backend call, we get our new books, and if we have all the books we need, we can emit here in the effects a new action, which are books loaded with the new list of books, and then this is going to send to the reducer instead. Another thing which is great about Novel and X, it also provides us with another library that helps us managing such kind of side effects, which can be pessimistic updates, optimistic updates, fetching data as we saw before, and also navigating to certain components and managing state there, like with our filtering. And we can see this later in an example. So let's look at the filtering again. We have here the filter we're using, and we also have it's also represented here in the URL. And in order to also get state from the URL, we have to add also initial library, which is called the router store, to also get some information about the router in our store. And if we edit this now, we can use this database system.navigate, and here pass in the component. I want to listen to the router state, and here I receive, here this is the router state, and also the state if I want to have some additional knowledge about what's going on in the state. And I can handle the navigation and handle my filter array and filter my books before I'm entering the route. And it's going to look something like this. So I have here my active route state, and I can take query parameters from the active route state, which are going to be my filters, and then I can return a new state of books. And here I'm just filtering the books list. That's just static, because it would be a lot of coding if I also going to do backend calls here. So it's just static in this example. But I could also do a backend calls here, get the books, and then filter them and make a new request. And I also have an error callback, and can do, if in the routing goes something wrong, I can route somewhere else. In this case, I just console log the error, but I can also like manipulate the router and say, go to an error page because it was not working out. Let's look at this in a demo. So I'm switching to a second application in case in the first demo there was something going wrong. And I also have here already installed the router state, because you never know about internet in these conferences. So I already have this instead. And what I'm adding now is a book state, a book feature state. I already have my state initialized, and I'm just using NgGenerate Novel, Angular, and Xbooks, and I'm gonna do this in my book module. So I'm just entering this command. I already have the Novel functionality added. It asks me if this is going to be my root state. No, it's not. It's going to be a feature state, and it also asks me for something else we're going to talk about later. At the moment, no. And you can see here on the side all these files were produced for me. So it helped me dealing with all of the boilerplate code, and I don't have to worry about it much. And if I go into the reducer, we already see something similar that I showed before in the presentation. It already created me some book state with a list of entity, which I don't want. I already have an entity that's called books. So I'm going to replace this. And I called it book. So I'm going to replace this. And I also have here a reducer, which has the books loaded functionality in there. And here in actions, I already have some default action that NX produced for me, which is load book, books loaded, and books load error. This is the old syntax that is reproducing here for me. There's a newer syntax, which is easier to read, but didn't update it yet, but I hope this is going to come soon. And since I don't have the identity here, and I want a payload when I'm creating an action of books loaded that's going to be of a book array, I also going to replace this here. So this is a lot of code you can look at, so you can try it out at home and look at it. But what we are actually going to do is we have here an application. I'm going to save this, which already has our service implemented. And what we want to do is we also want to implement here the filter functionality in this NgRx store. So what it's also producing here for us already is here one effect, and this effect is listening to load books and gives me back here a new list of books. Normally I would make here a backend call to my API and give back my book, but since I'm always not sure about the internet of this conference, I just give you back a static list of books. So that's cool. And what we actually want to implement now is a new effect, which is going to manage my navigation, and it's going to filter my books. So let's do that. So here we have an effect decorator, which is going to tell it's an effect, and I want to filter books. And this filter books effect is going to use data persistence here on button, and data persistent navigate. And navigate, as I told before, is taking the component I want to navigate to, which is going to be my book list component. And it's going to have two callbacks. So it's going to be the run callbacks, which is telling me which kind of functionality I want to run when I'm entering this route. So here I have the state, the active route state, and now I can ask for my filters here, which is going to be in my query params map. I think they're going to be my params map, sorry. And it's params.map.get, of course. And so I receive here back my filters, and then I will ask here if I get a valid filter here back, which is going to be either a number or it's also not valid if it's -1. And if this is the case, I will return a new state, which is books loaded, and give back books loaded, my static list of books in this case, so all of my books, and otherwise I am going to filter for a filter. So I'm also returning a new state, which is new books loaded, and I'm here returning a filtered list of books. So I take my whole list of books, which I would normally receive from the backend, and I just filter it accordingly and say, look at all of my genres, and if there is some genre which is having this filter as an ID, then give it back to me. So, and this effect should also already take effect on the application now. Now I just have to replace in my book list component the service I'm currently using with my NgRx store. So I'm switching to the book list component, and I'm here adding my store. So I have here book NgRx store, and this is going to be a store which I'm getting from the NgRx store, and it's going to have my book state. So I'm just going to ask for my, it's going to be partial book state. Books partial state. And so I can use this now to dispatch an action to actually tell the NgRx store that it should load my books. So I take the NgRx store and say, dispatch a new action, and the action is going to be of load books. So I'm tell the NgRx store to initially loading my books. And I also want to now replace this line of code with something I'm selecting from my store. So I'm going to use a selector. So I'm piping here the store and selecting a state, which is going to be of something of the book queries. So my selectors, and here I want to get all books. That's everything I need to do. And if I serve this now, and filter for books, it should work again, because I'm switching here. So it's actually quite easy to implement with the help of the data persistence. One more thing I want to talk about is what we actually did now. So we have our component, and now my component needs to know about all this stuff. It needs to know about the store, it needs to know how to use selectors, it needs to know what actions we have, it needs to know the state, it needs to know stuff of the reducer. And behind those are the effects, which are maybe making HTTP REST calls, which is a lot of logic to know for a component, right? So what some really smart person thought about is abstracting this with something called an NgRx facade to make the component more dumb again and not be able to know about all of these kinds of states. So what the facade of us does, it basically we have to think about a public facade API for our store to create nicer state, and it also masks internal interactions with the store, so you don't have to know about everything that's going on in the store, which is especially great if you have new programmers that coming into your project and they don't know anything about NgRx, and so you can just mask that and just let them use the facade. And also it lets your components stay dumb, as I mentioned before, so they don't have to know about everything. And I'm quickly going to show this also in a demo. I still have time. So I'm switching back to my application, and what I'm now doing, I'm going to here my state router, and I'm creating a new file, which I'm going to name bookfacade.ts. And what I'm here doing is I'm just making a simple service. So I use some helper function and make a service, and here I name it bookfacade. And I just want to provide it here in the root state, so I use provided in root. And what I'm here doing, I'm here letting the facade know about the router state. So I'm here having the store which is going to be the store of my NgRx, and it has the book spatial state in it. Book spatial state in it. So, and what I'm here designing is things that I want to tell my component. I basically want to tell it all the books I have. So I have here all books, which is going to be an observable of book array, and this book array observable is going to receive my books from my store. So I'm using the store again to slice some state out of it with the selector again. With the books query, I'm going to use all books. And also want to trigger some action, which is load me all books. And here I'm just going to say dispatch, store dispatch, load all books, new load books. That's all I need from a facade right now. I didn't have any additional functionality. And now I can go back to my book list here. And use instead of the NgRx store my books facade. Books. Book facade, I named it. And here, instead of dispatching the action directly, I just say load books. So I don't need to know anything about the store. And also here, I'm just gonna get the observable of all books. And now I can get rid of this imports. So I don't need, this component doesn't need to know about anything about the store. So, and if I save this again, I wonder, yeah, I stopped it. So I can start it again now. I forgot something. I started it somewhere else. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to look at this at the end if it works. Because we're limited in time. So this was the second facade demo. It should work. I'm going to show you at the end. And what you can also do with facades, you can adjust hide internal behavior of the NgRx store itself. You can do anything else you want behind it. You can use other libraries. You can use an observable data service. So if you have functionality that is not that complicated and doesn't need so many boilerplate files and so many management, you can also use multiple libraries in your application. You're not just limited to choose one thing. So what do I want to give you on your way for managing your state of your application? There are a few things you should take in mind if you're choosing. So first of all, if you're considering using frameworks, look at why they were created. What was the issue they're trying to solve? For NgRx, it was a really specific issue of Facebook and messaging. And so Facebook is not a small application, so it's obviously not for managing small application. It would be overload for that. Second of all, think of what your application does. Think of the state of your application. Think of the state of your application you need to manage. Think if you have persistent state or transient client state or whatever you have in your application, and if you really need a lot of state management application or it's just local stuff you need to manage. Also great advice, this is the creator of Redux, which was originally called Flux library for state management, and he said, if you, in our case, NgRx are like glasses, you'll know when you need them. So if you're really struggling like the cat before and you can't figure out where your state is changing and stuff, then you might consider another state library. Otherwise, for most cases, RxJS will be fine, you know? And also, if you choose to use NgRx, people treat it like NgRx is the solution, you know? You just install it and that's it, and it's managing your state. And it's not like this. You still have to think about really how you design your actions, how you design your original initial state, and so much more if you're using the NgRx library. So don't just install it because it's a hot topic and everybody is talking about NgRx. Really think if you really need it or not. And last, I would suggest that you start with a facade and use a library like Observable Data Service with RxJS behind it. And if you're really struggling with it, you can like replace step by step your application with another state library and use that behind it. That was it for me. We're going to look if my example worked. That was it for me. You can ping me on Twitter if you have questions, or look at our website for workshops and so on. Thank you so much for listening. I'm maybe just going to take a look if this example works or if I lied. So yeah, the filtering works. And I started the right application. So it also works with the facade. I was just too busy waiting. Here's some credit. Yeah, thank you so much for listening.